Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Hat Chat. I am Norma Shepherd, the director of the Mobile Millinery Museum and the author of 5 books on vintage fashion, including 1,000 hats. Today I have my museum gloves on because we're going to go deep into the archives and look at some Downton Abbey era hats. And of course, the film Downton Abbey opens with the sinking of the Titanic, and then we move through the series and we end up in the early 1920s. So I want to have a look at what some of the real life people who those characters represent might have worn in that era. So I want to begin with what some of the fashion magazines of that era referred to as a sombrero hat, and you can see why. Very, very huge. This would sit on a pompadour hairstyle, upturned hair that they used to roll their hair over what were called rats, almost like the bottle brush curlers of the modern era. And that would support these hats, but also the crowns of these hats were often fitted with a drawstring bag in which you could stuff tissue paper. You can hear this, the stuffing in there. So the hat would sit quite high. And of course, no Edwardian lady would be without a magnificent hat pin. This one is pewter. It's quite a lengthy pin. I have measured this, but I can't remember offhand how long it is. But in Britain, if your hat pin was longer than 9 inches, you would require a permit in those days. So this is quite a magnificent hat. Now, you may think this is certainly an outdoor hat for an outing, but it's not necessarily for winter. Furs denoted wealth, and this is a beaver fur, a long nap felt, and so you wore them winter and summer just to show your prosperity, your husband's wealth, perhaps. Now, another more common style, this almost has a bit of a Spanish flair from that era. This is a velvet wide brim. Again, the inner crown has been lined, but the silk is deteriorating and falling away. But there are remnants of where this could have been stuffed a little bit too. Now, the ostrich feather on this hat is quite a lengthy one. And what occurred was, of course, ostrich feathers were always very popular in millinery, and the fronds continue to be. But someone got the notion one day that, well, maybe that wasn't quite lavish enough. And they picked up all the little fronds that had fallen, on the workroom floor. And they must have had time on their hands because they tied them to the ends of the existing fronds on the feathers. And so these particular ostrich plumes became known as willows. So I know that in the early, in the teens, in the early catalogs, these willow feathers sold for $25 in their day. So now, a lady of means in the Downton Abbey era would have hats for every activity, including sporting activities. And so I'm pleased to show you this wonderful tennis hat from that era. Now, of course, this being a sporty hat, it would not be of extremely lavish material, but the straw is a very fine braid. It still would have been an expensive hat. The crown is covered in a crushed velvet of this lovely peach color. And by the way, we have a lot of costume in the archive from the Victorian era through to the 1970s. And many of the pieces from the teens and the 20s, dresses, gowns, hats, were of this wonderful peach color for some reason. Anyway, it was quite popular in its day. And then this medallion is hand sewn and appliqued in pieces of silk. So imagine that for playing tennis. And it's cut away at the back, no problem lobbing the ball, and of course you're shaded from the sun in the front. Even the brim is wired and it's covered in silk. Now the interior says, let's look at the label, and this is really fun too because they used to stamp the labels onto the lining. So this is Brentwood Sports. Yeah. And you know, even though it's not perfect, it's had a lot of love and it shows us great style. Now, during that Edwardian era, many wealthy families would have a milliner and or dressmaker actually sometimes living with them on their estate, and they would be not only creating fashions for different social events, but they would also be refurbishing them, maybe making gowns, you know, altering them, remaking them for a younger daughter. They were also responsible often for cleaning them, cleaning the hats, cleaning many of the silk and satin gowns. Really, they couldn't be laundered, and harsh chemicals were used, benzene and all sorts of things for cleaning these garments. And if you were a lady of means, you would ensure that your daughter would pay attention and would know how to clean these things to make sure that the servants were doing the proper job and not destroying an extremely, yeah, maybe extremely too. I think I'd be screaming if I had purchased a Worth gown and someone had destroyed it by cleaning it. So that's kind of interesting. This is quite magnificent. It is crown shaped, and the base of the crown is a velvet. Then we have all this wonderful sequin work. We have some Chantilly lace supported on a wire frame. We have Bird of Paradise aigrettes, once again, you know, referencing the slaughter of magnificent birds for millinery. And then the crown is trimmed with ermine. So these are Titanic era, Downton Abbey era, and then we move to the 20s. We get some transitional hats where the crowns come down to hug the head in a cloche style. Wonderful, of course, pre-air conditioning. And if you think of the 1920s, that was as light as the fashions were in the Edwardian era because they were moving away from a sense of heaviness in the Victorian era. By the time you get to the 1920s and World War II is over and people are just so tired of heaviness and they want to celebrate, and it's a prosperous era, things become light. They become light in appearance, light in weight, light in color. Very true of fashion and also of furnishings. Now this one is just a wonderful open weave, simple little cloche, gorgeous blue, and it has a silk satin band. So picture that on a bobbed hairstyle. Now similarly, here's one again with a very shallow crown, but this has been stiffened, so this has structure to it. This is very similar in weave. It's this is a lovely green color, as you can see. The trimming is grosgrain, and the rim is banded with some wire. So this would sit slightly seductively, and it's a bit of a transition from the Edwardian to the 20s. Now we do have plenty of 1920s iconic pieces, and I can link also to a video I did on the boudoir caps, what they wore to bed. But I'm going to stop there with the 20s. But I want you to think about, you know, if you're a Downton Abbey fan, which character in the series might have worn which of these hats? Can you imagine? So let me know in the comments if you have any questions on vintage fashion, millinery in particular. And before I go, as always, I will tell you about the hat I'm wearing. This is another hat by Maria Kursic, Canadian milliner. This is not a sponsored video by any means. I just showing you this from my personal collection. And this one, I think she made this for me circa 1910. So there's the back. And you know, this is the hallmark of a well-made hat. Your hat should look great from every angle. I mean, she's a designer, and she has considered structure and form and positive and negative space from every angle. The feathers are delightful. This is the type of hat that I would wear. We did a Downton Abbey, I did more than one not last year. It feels like last year. I kind of skip over COVID in my mind. But we did a Downton Abbey tea where we showed lots of Downton Abbey era hats, jewelry, and fashions, and that was a lot of fun. So this is the type of thing I would sort of like to wear when I'm functioning in that role. And until I come back again, new content Mondays and Thursdays, and have a hatty evening. Thank you.